What is the ethics of space exploration? What kind of questions should we think about when settling humans in space? In this episode of Chai on the Moon, we address ethical questions regarding space exploration with Professor Brian Patrick Green. Our guest today is Professor Brian Patrick Green. He is Director of Technology Ethics at the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. And a lot of the things that he teaches and he researches on actually is relevant for other purposes. For example, he teaches AI ethics. He focuses on AI and ethics, technology ethics in corporations, the ethics of space exploration, which we are going to talk about today, the ethics of technological manipulation of humans, the ethics of mitigation and adaptation towards risky emerging technologies. Again, really, really relevant right now, and various aspects of technology and engineering on human life and society, including the relationship of technology and religion, particularly the Catholic Church. He's the author of, he has co authored many books, including Ethics in the Age of Disruptive Technologies and Operational Roadmap. But in 2021, he had this book, The Space Ethics. And this is a lot of it what we'll be talking today about. And so, Professor Green, welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me on the show. It's great to be here.
Thank you. And I know AI, which you are really enmeshed in it as well, uh, that is in the news. But at the same time, there is another thing that is being talked about slowly more, and we are seeing that progress more and more happening, and that is about the human settlements, thinking about human exploration, thinking about human presence in space, and especially on the moon. And I think it would not be an exaggeration, although it still sounds funny to say that, but like in the next decade or so, we are going to see likely human bases on the moon. How many people go? That's a separate question. So, as a person who has thought a lot about space ethics and who have also written about space ethics, when it comes to the human settlements on the moon, what is the biggest ethical concern that you see? Like just on the top of your head, sort of like, that, hey, here is something that I'm really concerned about, or this is something that worries me.
So, my first ethical concern would be for the safety and health of the astronauts who are sent there, or the scientists or other folks who will be involved in this mission. Just because space is an extremely hostile environment, it's very likely that they could experience. Well, first of all, they'll definitely experience kind of shorter term health problems, and then the longer term health problems are also going to be a significant issue in terms of, they'll lose bone density, they'll lose strength, they will very likely have digestive problems and all sorts of other sorts of things that go wrong and that are associated with high radiation environments and with microgravity. Although, of course, the moon does have a certain amount of gravity, you have to go through microgravity in order to get there. And the moon's gravity, of course, is only about a sixth that we have here on the Earth, so it's actually quite low. It's better than nothing. It will help them definitely to stay a little bit healthier than if they were in, for example, the space station. But the health problems overall are just a really huge issue and something that can't be ignored. And it's going to be an ongoing question as to how long people can stay there on the moon. Can they stay there for long periods of time, or do they need to come back within a year? So far, some of the longest amounts of time that people have been in space have been on the space station, and they've been up there for roughly around a year. And those have very significant health effects.
Uh, do you think it? I mean, of course, it does matter whether somebody is going there for a job or whether somebody is going there voluntarily. So, I mean, when you are talking about these issues, I mean, I'm thinking, and I know that initially that won't be the case, but I'm thinking if there are people who not seek adventure, but certainly who believe in human presence out there on the moon, does some of that self motivation in that context mitigate some of the ethical concerns that you are raising? I mean, people know, hey, yeah, I'm going to lose bone density on the moon. Yes, moon is a difficult place to live, but it's my decision. I want to go and live there. So how does that feature in?
So you're absolutely right, which is that there are people who want to do this, which is good, and I think it's also something that we, as a civilization here on Earth, I think it's great that we are making these steps out there into space because this is an opportunity for us to learn new things, to explore new technologies, to conduct science experiments, and to learn more about the universe overall. And therefore, we should be very grateful towards these individuals who are willing to take these risks and make these sacrifices on our behalf. It's not just them that are, they're putting their life on the line in order to provide benefit to all of civilization in that way. And I think we should remember that, and we should definitely appreciate them. Of course, astronauts are very often, looked up to as heroic figures, so they get that as kind of a compensation. But at the same time, we do need to consider the fact that we are asking these folks to risk their lives, and of course, all those health effects that we were just talking about don't even get to the question of whether the rocket explodes on takeoff or whether they get caught in a solar storm on the way there and die from radiation poisoning. There are just a lot of things that can go wrong. So it's something that we need to think about and make sure that the people who are involved in it also recognize what's happening and what sort of risks they're encountering.
So, I mean, so if I can sort of like flip that question a little bit, because you did mention that we benefit, right? I mean, so there is this also this whole question of who is we in that
Right.
context and how
Yep.
we identify it. In your book, Space Ethics, you actually start with one of the questions, and in some sense that has been raised by some people, some other people as well, about, well, should we go to space, right?
Right.
And that is, I mean, obviously, there can be an ethical justification for going to space, and then there are also ethical justifications that you can say, actually, no, we should not go to space. So, how does that play in? Can you map out that terrain?
Yeah, that's a huge question. When you asked your first question, I thought to myself, "Am I going to talk about the expense question or the health
Yeah,
question?"
yeah.
So this you've gotten to the second, I think, really most important thing is, should we be spending money on this at all? And that is an enormous issue that we have to think about because it is incredibly costly, and that money could be spent on other things that benefit people here on Earth. For example, in terms of education or health or other sorts of things that can really benefit people. I mean, we have a lot of problems here on Earth. Um, One of the things that I think we should remember, though, is that when you're talking about the way budgets for countries are set, for example, very often, if you cut space, that money's not going to be directed towards education or health or international aid or things like that. It's just not how a budget works. Um, and at the same time, of course, lots of people talk about spin-off technologies and all the benefits, technological benefits that we've gotten from space exploration, which are absolutely true and valid. Those are wonderful, important things that have happened thanks to space exploration. Um, but of course, if we had wanted to, we could have spent the money directly on creating those things without having to go through space and having it be a side effect. So there's also that kind of balancing question there. Overall, I'll just say I'm in favor of space exploration in terms of settlement in space. I think that it is overall worth the cost, but we need to be very aware of the fact that yes, there are incredible needs here on Earth, and ultimately, those are important things that we need to keep in mind, and we should be considering that hopefully the things that we are discovering in space or exploring in terms of technology, we really do need to intentionally think about what their positive effects could be back here on Earth for other folks too, because it's one thing just to explore space and discover new things and gain knowledge and all those other sorts of things, and they could be very important. For example, if we discovered that there was an asteroid headed towards the Earth because we set up a telescope on the moon or something like that, that could end up saving millions of lives, billions of lives, even depending on how big this asteroid were. There are very important things that we can learn from going into space that we might not learn if we weren't there. So we really need to kind of balance that kind of. It's a risk calculus, right? Ultimately, and also an opportunity calculus, which is that are we going to be gaining the best effects through the actions that we're taking, and how do we really balance that? Because we need to very much absolutely consider the effects of not spending money on things that we need here on Earth.
But there is another element as well, and one of the things that I was thinking was in terms of the place itself, and again, humans don't have, in some ways, the best of records, especially right now in terms of. I mean, I shouldn't say the word because that has a religious connotation, stewards of the planet,
Mm.
but certainly the other way of thinking about that would be top of the food chain. And have been in charge of it, and to a certain degree, being uh, responsible for other species on the planet and the Earth as well. And you have that coming in context that when humans go to the moon, and I am deliberately using the word when because humans will go to the moon, there are going to be environmental impacts on the moon as well. And so, in that context, do you think that when we ask this question, should we, and again, we, I'm putting it in quotes and with humans in there, does that, can we make a case that yes, we ought to, or does it go within the context that you can make the case that no, we don't because of what we have done here on Earth, or how do we justify that ethically?
Yeah, that's a huge issue. Lots of people have said, "Hey, don't we have enough problems here on Earth? Do we need to spread them to other places in space too?" And I tend to I think that's not necessarily a really good argument. And the reason I think that's the case is because um, I mean that's a very pessimistic view of human nature. And yes, humans have made lots of mistakes in the past, and we continue to make those mistakes. We're not exactly the most trustworthy animals on the face of the earth, if you want to put it that way. But at the same time, of all the places in space to go, the moon is probably the best place for us to make our first step, and it's luckily right there next to us, because it is completely lifeless. There's no native life that we're going to damage. There's no contamination that we're going to bring back to Earth. All of the thankfully the Apollo explorations and missions that went there and back, verified that there's not life on the moon that we're going to have to worry about killing. Um, and so we don't have to worry about forward contamination and we don't have to worry about backwards contamination. And since there's no life there, we can't kill anything. But then we get into the question of what is the moral value of a lifeless place? And this is actually a really interesting question, and it's not simple to answer. You can make all sorts of arguments about the ethical value of lifeless places, that it has its kind of own existence. It's been there without us in the past, and so it has kind of its own value that is independent of human opinion of it, which is all true. But that also gets into these serious metaphysical issues, like, well, who's valuing it if not human valuing it? Um, so what we do know, however, before, without getting into the metaphysical or religious questions that are centered around this, what we do know is that human beings are going to be making these decisions about the moon if when we go there, and we know that if we damage the moon or abuse it or do bad things to it, that reflects badly on our character. It not only makes us look bad, it makes us into worse people, because the more bad things we do, the worse people we become. And so, what we can do, and this is a virtue ethics perspective, we can think about ourselves, right? Which is to say, I don't want to be a bad person. A bad person would abuse the moon, would perhaps, draw, their face on the moon so that everybody saw their face, or an advertisement. I mean, people have talked about this, right?
Yeah.
Let's put a giant advertisement on the face of the moon. What a great advertisement that would be. And you can say to yourself, you know what? The kind of person who would do that is probably not a good person. And so let's make sure that we don't become these kind of bad people that we can already recognize is perhaps a temptation that we need to resist. And so, really, this kind of virtue ethics question and wanting to be better people and the kind of people who would treat the moon with care, even if there's nothing alive there, I think is what we should be aiming for. We should be trying to aim to be good people and not bad people.
Uh, so that begs the question in the sense that, okay, but who gets to go, right? I mean, so I mean, in some sense, and you had also said before, sort of like, that, okay, so people who are going there, we should, in some sense, I mean, we should be grateful that they are risking their lives and so on and so forth. And this particular question, I mean, obviously, the emblem right now, and when we think about it, is Elon Musk's name comes up sort of like, immediately. Oh my goodness. And from that perspective, especially the comments, fortunately, he's leaving the moon alone, but the statements that he has made about Mars, both as an astronomer and just as a human being, I'm appalled by it, right? And so when you're saying this, like, that, okay, so we what we would like to do, and we would want to be our best form in order to do that. And but if we, our representatives, are, let's say, Musk or somebody else, like, who has these plans, they are going there, does that make it unethical to go if the people who are making plans may not be the ones who we think would be doing good?
Yeah, so that's another really hard question. You've come up with some really good ones.
Yeah.
The question is, so let me see if I'm recapitulating this in the way that you would agree with. Are you saying it would be better not to go than to send bad people?
Yes, I
Okay.
think yes, because
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that is that is a fascinating question that's really difficult to answer actually, because I think we could make the argument that yes, it would be better not to go than to send people that we would argue are bad people. Um, at the same time, you can argue everyone's a bad person in some ways and everyone's a good person in some ways. So there's always that balance between good and bad in every single person. Also, we know very well that bad people can actually do good things over time. Like there are lots of people who have either been inventors or business people or things like that who would look at me and say, you know what, I'm not sure that was a good person, but they ended up creating a product, for example, that helped a lot of people. So there's also this kind of difference between people as people and then the actions that those people do, which is kind of another division to think about. And then there's the issue of it might be a person who we would say is a bad person, but they set up a settlement, say on Mars or on the moon, for example, and then lots of good people move there, and over time it becomes a better place. Or it acts in a way which is to protect human civilization in some ways by making sure that we have these people who are off planet in a self-sustaining colony, or not colony, colony is the wrong word for it, settlement. um, and so acts as a backup Earth, which is one of the things that Elon Musk has argued for, which is that we're in too much danger here on Earth. Let's not have all our eggs in one basket. Let's put some folks over on Mars so that we have this kind of backup plan in case something goes wrong. So it's really complicated in that way because humans are not simple in any moral sense. Um, I think that there's a strong argument to be made for saying that we should at least go slowly and try to make sure that we're sending the best people that we can when we are doing these sorts of space settlements. But at the same time, there's also international cooperation to think about. If there's a competition between two countries, for example, and each country thinks that they're the good guys, and they all view each other as the bad guys, then we're also going to get in this sort of race dynamic, which could be extremely morally complicated. And in that case, if you're the good guys, of course you want to get there first. If you're, quote unquote, the good guys, that's the way you view yourselves, at least. Of course, you want to get there first, whether you're actually the good guys or not. And once again, life is complicated, and we have to start thinking bigger picture, which is maybe in those sorts of situations. We go ahead whether we think that this is the most morally pure thing or not. But this is, once again, history is full of us human beings trying to make the best decisions that we can in very complicated, morally ambiguous situations. And sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't work out. We're going to be bringing that with us as we go into space. Hopefully, we will also at the same time be aspiring to be the best humans have ever been.
Yeah, well, road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I mean, I think,
It's
uh,
true.
uh, and this is something that you discuss in your book as well, and it's a follow up to our conversation to that, and um, because once. you are on the moon, and again, and I'm using the moon as an example. Partly the reason for this particular series as well, because moon is going to set the tone for all the other places, because the international treaties that we have, like the Outer Space Treaty and others, they're all centered on the moon. And once the precedence has been set, then whether it's an asteroid or whether it's Mars or Europa for all that matter, it really, that's going to be a secondary thing. uh, and moon is a little bit odd because it's a smaller place, so it's not going to be a full big settlement. So there are also exceptions to that. But on the moon, one of the reasons to go is going to be for its resources. And that is part of the reason to get there, to mine the resources, potentially to create rockets to and launch them from a lower gravity environment from there, or from stations around it. So you asked this question in your book as well, like, so okay, so how do we determine, like, how much exploitation of natural resources, or how much use of natural resources in that sense, can we say is ethically okay, is ethically justifiable? And because that's, to a certain degree, we are going, and that flips to that question about having a lifeless body.
Mhm.
Is there a value to it, and what is that value, and how do we think about it?
Yeah, first I'll say you're exactly right about the moon is going to set the tone for the rest of exploration. Right now, I think that humanity has set a pretty good tone for our interaction with outer space. We've done a lot of great science. We've done a lot of great technological exploration. Um, and and so the tone I think is good right now, but the question is, money is starting to get involved now, right? And as money gets involved, the intentions are going to become less pure. If the road to hell is paved with good intention, bad intentions don't even ask the question anymore. um, so this resource exploitation question is a huge one, and I think that there are a few things that we can think about with in terms of resource exploration. The first is that if we're going to have a steady presence in space, we absolutely need to be doing resource exploitation in situ. In other words, at the location itself. We cannot bring everything from Earth. It's just not practical. Um, Next thing to think about is the fact that some places in space have a lot more of certain types of resources and less of others. So the moon, for example, is quite dry. And of course, they have found water in certain places on the South Pole, for example. Um, Inside of craters that never are exposed to sunlight. But even then, it's not very much water, and so we have to think to ourselves, well, maybe we could get a nice comet or something like that, and if we could capture the comet and put it into orbit around the moon, then we could take the water off of that, and we'll have all the moon that, or all the water that we need on the moon. Um, and then that raises the next question, which is like, well, who said that we could have that comet? When it comes down to it, are we just allowed to grab things and use them? We're really used to that kind of exploitative mindset here on Earth, but not all civilizations actually agree on that. Not all cultures, not all groups of people on Earth think that you should just go around taking things and using them in that way and destroying them. So we need to have, I think, a bigger conversation on Earth about what the right way is to use resources. Um, right now, of course, the way the economy is structured on Earth, we very much look at things in terms of, oh, we can buy it, we can sell it, we can do whatever we want to with it. If you have the money, that gives you the power to decide. But I think that one of the things that we're noticing now is that, of course, this is actually quite damaging to the Earth's environment. And of course, since the Earth is a living place and it's full of animals and plants and human beings, this is very very negatively affecting lots of people here on Earth and the environment as a whole. Once again, the moon is a completely different environment, so we might ask ourselves once again, well, can we just gobble up the entire moon and use it for our ends? I think the answer to that is no. There's something about these extraterrestrial locations that we just need to be very careful with. We should go slowly. We can absolutely use the resources that they have, but we need to be very careful about it. Um, we need to make sure that we're not completely destroying the location, for example. So we shouldn't be thinking about disassembling the moon and turning it into a giant space station or something like that. Of course, that's well beyond our technology now. But in the future, people have talked about this. And if we talk about smaller places, for example, an asteroid, we might ask ourselves, well, what's the value of that asteroid? How much are we allowed to consume? Are we allowed to destroy the entire thing? If it's a kilometer across, does that mean we can destroy it? If it's less than that, if it's more than that, what's the kind of boundary? And what who gets to make these decisions and why? So it very much becomes kind of a collective question of how we're going to make this decision together. Are we just going to let the rich people with the money decide what to do with it? Are we going to let the United Nations decide? Are we going to let individual countries decide if, for example, space exploration continues as it is here on Earth, just being something that individual countries do or groups of countries do, for example, in Europe? Um, these questions, once again, they're not easy to answer, but I think that we have a lot of resources to help think about these things. So and that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, was to provide those resources so that people can look at these problems and say, okay, here's one way to grab a hold of the issue and think about it, and maybe here's another way of grabbing a hold of the issue and thinking about it, and hopefully that book also will start a conversation so that other people can say, oh, you forgot this. Here's another idea, and hopefully all together we'll come up with enough good ideas that we'll be able to actually solve these problems.
Yeah, well, thank you. And by the way, I'm watching on PBS these days American Buffalo. Ken Burns.
Hmm.
So I'm at Hampshire College, and Ken Burns is our most famous alum in some sense. And American Buffalo, I've been watching it. It's just like, I mean, it's striking in terms of like how many buffaloes there were, like
Hmm.
millions here, and then within 100 years they pretty much disappeared. And it
Hmm.
talks about, for example, indigenous ethics or
Hmm.
indigenous views in terms of that their hunting of buffaloes was very linked with that, like, that they would thank the buffalo as well, sort of like, because it was part of the environment,
Right.
whereas later on it wasn't. And that's a type of thing. When you were also talking about how do we think about these lifeless planets, I mean, indigenous ethics also come into play about places. Do they have sacredness or not,
Right.
in that sense? And that's a question that's something that we will have to address. You alluded to that, who gets to decide whether something has a value or not, or how we should do that. And if we think in terms of the power dynamic, right? I mean, so right now it would be the richest countries deciding in that sense, or and people within the richest countries. So
Hmm.
do you think that there ought to be, and again, this may be a completely impractical question, uh, but there is United Nations, there are United Nations Outer Space Affairs Committee, and so on and so forth. Do you think we ought to assemble those groups and says, okay, hold on, this is the way we should get together first, really think through before we really start setting up the lunar base? Or what's going to happen, and that's my pessimistic angle, like, that, hey, that people are going to do that, and there is no point in pressing for this kind of pause or this kind of thinking.
Yeah, this is another interesting question, of course, which is that it would be great if people could get together and think really hard and talk to each other and come up with good rules ahead of time. But it turns out that people are really bad at that, actually.
Right.
We wait until the emergency hits us. And we've seen this with artificial intelligence, right? Which is
Right.
that people have been talking about AI and ethics for the longest time. They've even, done some good work on it, had good conversations, tried to get things set up in terms of policy and stuff like that. But it's not until it becomes an emergency that people actually want to do things, which is, you can see kind of this language in the executive order that the president of the United States put out, just a couple weeks ago, which is the whole thing is framed in kind of a national security type of framework under the National Defense Authorization Production Act. And so because it has this emergency framing around it, that means that suddenly we can do something. Um, because if there's not an emergency, the implication, of course, reversed from that, is that if there's not an emergency, then we shouldn't be doing anything. So this is kind of what happens. Is it's very likely that there might not be a lot of foresight in terms of settling uh, on the moon, in terms of in situ resource exploitation or utilization. What's that going to look like? Um, Now, I might be wrong, because, for example, the Outer Space Treaty was made in 1967, and I think ratified in '68, if I remember correctly. And of course, the moon landings happened the next year. They actually got ahead of the problem, which is kind of remarkable when you look back at this, how foresightful they were at the time. So I might be wrong, but on the other hand, I think I'm more likely to be right, which is that people are gonna get there, they're gonna start screwing around, and people are gonna say, "Hey, look what he's doing over there. They're messing something up. Stop doing that," or "No, you're not allowed to take souvenirs from the Apollo landing sites," that kind of stuff. And then, and actually, I think there might already be some conversations about how to treat these archaeological sites on the moon in terms of the Apollo landing sites. But I think we're, for some reason, at this particular point in time, people are more likely to do something and then think about what they've done rather than think first and then act. So that's just the point where we are, culturally speaking, as a civilization on our planet. And of course, like you've said many times, it's not just, we have one civilization, but we also have many different civilizations and many different cultures who are all a part of this with very different perspectives on these issues.
And somehow that's I mean, that doesn't give me much confidence in the sense about this approach of first doing it and then thinking about, hey, what we should have done, because historically, again, that hasn't really panned off. And outer space treaty is interesting. I mean, that's a very optimistic vision. It is a little vague as well, and hence there are some loopholes. That's why everybody agreed. Nevertheless, that was at the height of the Cold War that it got passed, and everybody agreed to it. So that, I think, is great. Yeah, I'm less hopeful in terms of what's going to go. So let me ask you slightly in a different tangent from politics back to ethical issues. One of the ways that people have thought about, especially, say, for example, living on Mars, but it also again applies to Moon in particular. But for Mars, people have thought about, including Musk, that okay, we can terraform it or
Hmm.
we can change it in however ways. But with CRISPR technology and with genetic modification possible, another way to go about is to modify humans that are going to live over there. And since you have also written about technological aspects of that, I'm just curious in terms of what do you think about the fact that we have the capability and we can say, for example, if we are going to live on Mars, we can modify ourselves with certain type of genes that can protect us from the ultraviolet radiation from the sun. And so is that, do you think, again, it's a similar kind of question, is that okay? And then the follow up to that is, and if they have descendants over there, which is likely the case, and they may not, for some modifications, they may not be able to come back to the earth.
Hmm.
Is that okay? So, how do we think in terms of the possibility of the application of genetic modifications for purposes of space exploration?
Yeah, my response to that is that we need to be exceedingly careful about these sorts of things. I think that I'm trying to remember. I think there was an evolutionary biologist, or perhaps he was a chemist. I'm not sure. His name was Leslie Orgel, and he said evolution is cleverer than you are. So, in other words, don't think you're the smartest thing around and that you can necessarily understand everything that's going on with biology, because guess what? These situations, evolution has been going on for a long time. It's come up with very clever solutions to a lot of very complicated problems in terms of how natural systems and ecosystems and organisms all interact with each other. And so the first thing I would say is that we need to be very humble and aware of our limitations when it comes to these sorts of issues. It might seem like a simple thing. Oh, we'll give people this gene and that will help DNA repair in a high radiation environment. But of course, every gene is not nearly as simple as we think it is. They often have many types of effects from one gene. My undergraduate degree was genetics, so that was quite a while ago. But I've
Yeah.
from and things have changed since then in terms of CRISPR has been discovered and things like that. But the fundamentals remain the same, which is that genetics is extremely complex. It's a miracle that any of us are alive at all, given how complicated everything is. It's just an utter absolute miracle that any of us can live any amount of time, because the number of things that have to go right constantly is just astronomical. So I would first say let's be very careful. Of course, we haven't done a whole lot of these sorts of experiments here on Earth, and when we do them, And we've kind of have a norm against it actually. So, for example, when the scientist in China made the manipulation of those two children there, um, at first he was proud of it. He said, "Hey, I did something fantastic," but everyone looked at it and said, "You know what? You broke a scientific norm, which is that we said we were not going to genetically manipulate human beings." So I think we need to first recognize that that norm exists, and there's a reason that it exists because it's much easier to damage complex organisms than it is to assist them in some way. So that's the first kind of big thing to think about is the humility argument. The second one after that is to think about the fact that you have to do experimentation on human beings in order to get these things to work. And it's human beings who can't give consent either because, when you're creating them, they're typically going to be in the form of embryos or something like that. Their parents might be able to give permission for it, but they themselves cannot give consent. There might be situations in the future where perhaps we could use genetic modification of adult organisms. Um, Theoretically possible. There's not a whole lot of research being done on that right now. I mean, there is because we'd love to cure genetic diseases. And there are certain ways to do that in some situations where, for example, you can replace a person's bone marrow or you can have them inhale a certain sorts of cells, which perhaps can, alleviate cystic fibrosis or something like that. There are possibilities for making that happen. But once again, you have to do the experiments if you're gonna actually do these things, and that requires once again taking risks. And do the people consent to these risks? Do they not consent to them? And by the time you get to space, you just take all these complexities on Earth and then you put them in a completely different environment to see whether it will work there, which just adds more complexity, more difficulty. It makes informed consent probably almost impossible because nobody knows really what's going to happen. Is it even going to be effective, or are you just going to get the negative, side of that treatment? So I'm generally, I guess what I would say is I'm very cautious. I don't think that it's impossible to think about those things, but I think that at this point in history, the technology and the knowledge that we need to make these things work properly is just not there. And so we need to be very careful about these sorts of ideas. Speculatively speaking, very interesting. If it came to modifying organisms like plants or something like that to grow on Mars, that's another question in and of itself. But human beings, I think we always need to be very aware of the fact that if we're talking about modifying human beings, these are human beings, and we need to be mindful that we shouldn't be frivolous with people's lives.
Do you think, say, for example, and again, we've moved a little bit from the moon to Mars, uh, that, I mean, you will have uh, humans that will be born over there, and so in some ways, even without necessarily intervention from humans, that they will be in a very different environment. And you also have an isolated communities to a certain degree, so the likelihood of changes over there are going to be different. But do you think, or how should we think about humans that are born there who may have difficulty coming back to the earth, right? I mean, like, they may not be able to adjust to the climate or the environment here on earth. And I mean, I guess, is it okay? I mean, to a certain degree, I mean, that was the choice of their parents or grandparents or whatever. And same kind of cases happen here with immigration or refugees
Mhm.
and all of that stuff as well. But I'm just curious, because that is a truly an irreversible thing. If you get born over there and you cannot get adjusted to the earth, does that feature in ethically?
Yeah, that's a great question because you're absolutely right. If, for example, a person was born on the moon, they're going to have very much lighter bone structure, most likely, unless you can figure out some way to get their body to deposit more bone. Now, the interesting thing about the last question you asked was about genetic modification. A lot of the times, you don't need to necessarily modify genes. You could perhaps inject them with something that would be some sort of chemical, or maybe not even inject them. Maybe there would be a pill that you could take um, that would increase bone density, or something that would increase the strength of their muscles, or other sorts of things like that. It's possible that you might be able to kind of raise them or prepare them as they're growing up to keep them strong enough so that they could eventually go back to Earth. Um, On the other hand, we don't have that technology yet necessarily either, or if we do have it, we certainly haven't actually tested it to see if it works. So it will be an experiment. It will be human experimentation. Nobody on Earth asked to be born, so every person who's born here didn't consent to that, and it'll be the same on the moon, right? Those children are not going to consent to it either, but they'll be in a very different and higher risk situation. So we do need to ask these sorts of questions about human reproduction. At the same time, when it comes to this, if the goal is to have a self-sustaining settlement that is off of the earth, then reproduction is absolutely necessary. It has to be something that's done. And so if that is the goal, then we have to acknowledge that this risk will be taken. And yes, we're putting future people at risk who did not consent to be in these situations. But hopefully, at that point, we will also have the necessary medical technology to make sure that we can take care of them and give them all the benefits that they need to have.
Um, Stephen Hawking, who also showed up on Star Trek: The Next Generation, he was on the holodeck, and he loved Star Trek. And in one of his books, I think it was Universe in a Nutshell, and I really like that part in which he says that the most unbelievable part of Star Trek: The Next Generation were not the aliens, but the humans.
Mhm.
And his point was that the likelihood that in the 24th century, when Star Trek: The Next Generation is based upon, that humans would look like humans is like, like today, it's pretty negligible. Uh, and and to a certain degree, this is the direction we are talking about, and I'll just push you a little bit further in this direction, and that is, and so if humans do modify in from whatever way, in terms of by living on the moon or Mars or beyond, and one of the things that we are thinking about, the frame was that once humans are beyond sort of like the earth, like, and that was one of the reasons that it's their survival is one of the motivational factors as well. At one point, at one what not at at what point, but rather, do you think there would be a point where we go like, the ethics that we were thinking about were human centered, but they are in some ways not that human centered anymore, because A, they are not here on earth where most of our ethics developed in terms of thinking about those questions, and that they have biologically, they have moved away from similarities with humans. I mean, however so do you think there, theoretically, there would be a point you go like, yeah, I mean, they really have, whatever they are, our descendants, A, from their perspective, that yeah, that would be a different point of view, that the same ethics that we are talking about today will not apply to them, and the vice versa, that in some ways our own justifications in terms of survivability may be thought differently because those may not be humans anymore. So does that,
Yeah, this
yeah.
this is so this is a fascinating question, which is that if 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 our ethics is based on something related to our human nature, and human nature changes, does that change ethics also? And this is actually something I've written a lot about because I've done research into the movement that's called transhumanism or humanity plus, where they're looking to change humans in exactly these sorts of ways. Um, and I tend to be, first of all, I'll say I'm relatively skeptical that there are a whole lot of modifications that can be made to humans that would be beneficial. I think there's lots of ways to damage the human organism, but actually not that many ways to improve us. So I think we should give evolution some credit here, or if you're a religious believer, give whoever your creator is some credit here. That actually we're pretty finely tuned organisms, and for the most part, like I said, it's a miracle any of us are alive at all. But what I would say is this is a really interesting question because you start getting into issues of what is morally important about human nature. Is it just our minds? Is it our minds and our bodies? Is it just our bodies? And then into questions of how exactly ethics operates. Because in the abstract, the most abstract way of viewing ethics is just something called the first principle of practical reason. And the first principle of practical reason is do good, avoid evil. It's just four words, very, very basic. And the reason it's the most abstract and basic principle is because it has absolutely no content to it. You don't know what good is and you don't know what evil are. You have to fill those in. And then when you fill those in, then you start getting to some complexity. So, for example, if you go back to medieval philosopher Thomas Aquinas, he said, look, there are five basic things that we need to think about in terms of content for that do good, avoid evil. We need to survive, reproduce, live in society, educate young, and seek the truth. It's just five basic things. Um, Now, not all of those apply to every single human being, because not everybody has to have children. We just have to make sure we have enough children to have the next generation. Not everybody has to spend all their time seeking the truth, because obviously, we need to survive. There are all sorts of other responsibilities that we have. And we even understand the concept of something like a draft with the military, which is that we recognize that some people are going to get drafted and they're going to die. And so for them, survival has been deprioritized as individuals so that as a group, the group will survive. And so we recognize these kind of terrible trade-offs that come from living in reality. But I think when you look at, once again, that content, those five very basic things, I don't think humans in the future are necessarily going to be different. I don't think that, for example, if you have these modified space humans, whoever they might be, they're probably not going to deprioritize survival. If they do, then they won't exist for very long. They'll probably still need to reproduce, because it's unlikely that they can have some sort of material immortality. That's just not very likely. They'll probably still want to live in society, because that's something very basic about human nature, is that we have division of labor, we cooperate with each other. Now, there is Isaac Asimov, who proposed these, I think they were called the Spacers, if I remember correctly, which were a group of humans who lived completely isolated from each other and are completely served by robots. And they would communicate, maybe through phone calls or something like that, video phone, whatever it was in the story, I can't remember. But they never encountered people directly. They just did not like the idea of being, social with each other, which is possible, I suppose. You could have robots fulfilling that kind of social function for you. Um, so maybe that would be one possible difference. That would be one way that you could say that they are fundamentally perhaps different than other humans. Maybe they could be non-social. At the same time, if they are reproducing and they have young, then of course those young will have to be educated. So that's the kind of fourth criteria there. And then the last one, seek the truth. Well, people are very good at lying to themselves and having very inaccurate representations of reality that they look at. And yet, at the same time, if you have to at least seek the truth enough so that you don't eat poison, I guess would be the most basic thing, right? You need to actually eat things that are food. You cannot lie to yourself about what's edible and say this poison's actually food, because if you eat it, then you die. So I think those five basic content things, I think, would be universal across to this next version of humanity. And if they're not, then it would be very strange. And so once again, we get into these situations where we're like, maybe they aren't human anymore. Maybe they're something fundamentally different from us. And that does, once again, get into these ethical questions. Do their ethics then become different? If their human nature changes into something that's not a human nature, but something else, some other sort of species nature, then potentially I think that the ethics could change in some ways.
That's really interesting. Um, so, I mean, I think I'm going to circle sort of like towards the end. I mean, in some sense, we are talking about whether humans change or not, and questions like that. Um, but there is another issue if we encounter another life, and that goes back not sort of like extraterrestrial, because I know that is a whole thing, and I'm also interested in that topic, but more in the context of Mars, and Moon is lifeless, pretty much, as far as we know. For Mars, there may still be microbial life there. There is a reasonable chance, and certainly that will be the case for, or I'm saying certainly, there can be a pretty strong case potentially for Jupiter's moon Europa,
Hmm.
or Ganymede, or Saturn's moon Enceladus. So, how do we think in terms of the value of those microorganisms on Mars? So if we find Mars, should should we go there? First of all, that's sort of like the first question. Like here and I find that ironic. I mean, because there is a lot of effort in finding life on Mars. Say tomorrow we come in and we find out we actually found not past life, but existing microbes on Mars. How
Hmm.
then should we think in terms of our colonization of Mars or settlements on Mars?
Yeah, I think that's a really crucial question, and the first one I think would actually be the safety question, right? Which is that I'm not sure that humans and these microbial life forms, should they be discovered, sh- probably shouldn't be interacting with each other immediately, because there's the potential there for negative interactions. Let's see, I'm getting something that says that the video is not working.
Oh,
Sorry, it just came back. I'm not exactly sure what went wrong. Um,
okay.
so let me back up. Why don't
Yeah, let's
you?
start again. Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you restate the question?
Okay. So now let me go back to this question, circle back towards the end about a question of life, but non Earth life. And what I want to ask is, what if we find microorganisms on Mars? And in that sense, I mean, one of the things that come in, like, should we then go and settle on Mars or not, even though we know that there is life that is native to Mars already?
Yeah, I think the first question is very much the safety question, which is, should humans be interacting with these microbes if they're discovered there? And the first response should be probably no. We need to be really careful about those sorts of interactions because, for example, even if they don't harm humans, if they stick to us and we bring them back to Earth, then they could hurt the Earth environment. So there's kind of a natural kind of this there's a whole field for this called planetary protection, which is preventing forward and backwards contamination. So we really need to think about this contamination issue and make sure there's none there. We have to make sure there isn't any to start with. But at the same time, we also need to start doing the research. It would be great to send perhaps a robotic laboratory down there, sample these creatures, look at them, learn about them. Do they have the same DNA that we have? Do they have very different DNA? Are they perhaps continuous with Earth life? It's quite possible that they could have the same DNA that we have, because we know that we can find Martian meteorites here on Earth. Perhaps it's possible to find Earth meteorites on Mars. Could have carried microorganisms in that direction, or we could have gotten, maybe Earth life is descended from Martian life. We don't know. Um, so with this kind of exchange going on between the planets, it's likely that there could be a genetic similarity between Martian microbes and Earth life. At the same time, it's also likely that it would be quite divergent, over time. So there's those interesting questions. If we discover this life and discover also that whether it's continuous with Earth life or not, if we discover that it's potentially dangerous, then we might need to actually stay away from the planet and put an off limits sign around it and say nobody's allowed to sit here. Um, and because once again, not only endangering the humans who are there, but everyone, every other human being and everything on Earth, if they ever try to bring that sort of contamination back this way. So there are lots of issues with that. But let's do the next step in that experiment, which is that perhaps we discover, okay, that's it's not a pathogenic organism. It doesn't seem to interact negatively with human life. It's just another sort of bacteria. Um, then do we say, does the planet belong to these microbes, or can humans go there, even though there's native life on the planet? And that gets into an interesting question of how are we going to interact with this other life form? Are we just going to come in as outsiders and take over their planet? Very much a colonization type of mentality, which is that, sorry, you don't count, we're moving in. And we've seen this, of course, happen on Earth and throughout recorded history. And but we're talking about microbes here, so they're very different. And we know that every time we brush our teeth, we're killing thousands or millions of microbes. So it's a different sort of moral situation. Um, and next, we might ask ourselves, well, if we're going to terraform Mars, um, we're changing the environment. The native life is probably not going to like the changes that we make to it, but we might actually make the environment better for them. If, for example, they're in a very tenuous existence where they could be killed very easily, because their planet is, Mars is a dying planet right now. It's not in great shape. It's lost most of its water. It's lost most of its atmosphere. So if we could improve things, maybe we're actually benefiting those native life forms. Maybe we could actually, I don't know, if we would want to, if you've read science fiction, David Brin has written the Uplift series. Maybe we could take those native Martian life forms, help them evolve into something more interesting? I don't know. These are all sorts of huge ethical questions that really get into the realm of science fiction, but also into terms of mythology, right? Because this is humans acting like gods, and this relationship between religion and space, I think, becomes more and more clear the more powerful humans become. I was just writing a presentation that I'll be giving later this week, um, which is I was comparing, let's look at Zeus and Thor and other lightning gods from history, and look at how much lightning happens on the Earth. There's about a billion lightning strikes every year on the Earth, and it produces about a billion joules of energy. And so altogether, it's about 10 to the 18th joules of energy that if you wanted to attribute that all to a god, you'd say, okay, they produce about that much energy. Humans are 2 orders of magnitude bigger than that in terms of our electrical production. So we've reached this point thanks to technological power, which we are vastly, more powerful than any of these old mythological gods. And when you're talking about terraforming planets or deciding the fates of organisms on other planets, once again, this is something very far beyond mythology. It goes into science fiction, and we have to ask ourselves: are we actually comfortable making these decisions? Do we trust ourselves? Do we think that are we being humble enough? Are we being grateful enough for the situation that we already have? And all these sorts of questions are not easy to answer. And yet, as we grow in power, we will have to answer these questions.
Yeah. So if I can just ask regarding that, and so I got into astronomy because of Carl Sagan. So of course I'm hugely indebted to and influenced by Carl Sagan, and his viewpoint, which I actually agree on that point, and his viewpoint was that if we do find Martian microbes on Mars, then we leave the planet for Martians, because you can ask this question, right? I mean, in the sense that if we are there, even if we say we want to preserve it,
Hmm.
like, here is an area, it's a no-go area for humans. I mean, our biome is such that it's going to impact them. But even if we say, okay, here they are going to be in this laboratory or whatever, like, we are impacting their future evolution. And
Hmm.
same way, I mean, like, if you say, well, we are going to improve it for by terraforming it, well, they didn't ask us like, to do that, and we are still interfering in it, as you say, playing god to a certain degree, to do that. So, and with the microbes question as well, because we do kill microbes, but here on Earth, and there is a different relationship with them. So do you think, and I will just jump ahead and say, like, because of course there is an interesting question, if the life on Mars is the same related to the Earth, what their value is, or if it is different, does that change their intrinsic value, of whether we can use it the same way as, by brushing teeth, or with the COVID, we were sort of like, killing germs left and right. uh, so in that context, I mean, we can play God, but the question is, do we have, ethically, it's the right thing to do, or do we have the right to do that on another planet?
Hmm.
Because again, to me, that opens up this precedence, like, that once we do that, does it count solar system ours, or and so on and so forth, right? And yeah, so how do we think in terms of that?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that Carl Sagan was fantastic. So I'm so glad that you mentioned him because yes, when I was a child, I watched Cosmos and all of those things. So he was just a really wonderful, scientist and explainer of science. So, and his perspective on Mars is one that I mentioned in the book, which is that, maybe it's just hands off. We don't interact with them, but we have to kind of ask these deeper questions of what's the meaning of human power here. If we're acting like gods, if we have this sort of godlike power, the way the playing God argument works is they say, oh, we can't play God, we shouldn't play God. The reason we shouldn't do that is not because we don't have the power, because we do have the power. The question is, we don't have the goodness. Most religions, when they talk about gods, at least recent religions, um, have said that God is all knowing, all powerful, all good. The all good aspect of that is something that humans absolutely do not have. And so, when most of the time, when people are saying we shouldn't play God, they're actually saying is that I don't trust human beings. And because even if we have the power and we can do these things, we shouldn't necessarily do them. And that's the Jurassic Park question, right? This is what Dr. Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park, who says just just because we can doesn't mean we should, or I can't remember exactly how he phrases it, but because technology is constantly giving us more power, it's constantly putting us into new situations that we've never been in before. People in the past had a lot of decisions made for them because they didn't have the power to make those decisions. We were weak in the past and we didn't have the power, and therefore we had a lot of decisions that were just cut off. We never had to make them. Now that we're so much more powerful, we can make these choices. We can decide to have nuclear weapons. We can decide to make artificial intelligence. We can decide to go to other planets and change them. And the question changes from can to should. And so the new limiting factor has to be our own judgment and our own ethics. And that's really what it comes down to: is that we, in the past, we were limited by our weakness. In the present, we need to learn to be limited by our good judgment. And that is one of the reasons that ethics has become so important right now, is because we have all these new decisions that we have to decide: should we do this or not? Now that we can, should we do these things? And it's it's great if you're an ethicist, because you get to think about these things all day long. But we also have to live in the world that we're creating together, and ultimately, it's one thing to think about these things, and another one to live in the world that we are creating. And when we say we, once again, as you've noted throughout this,
Yeah.
it's certain people who are making these choices, certain people in certain countries who are making these choices for all of us. And in that way, we hopefully, do we trust them? I mean, that's the question, right? If they're really making these sorts of powerful choices, do we trust them? Do we believe that they are good? Do they have everyone's best interest in mind? And the answer is, right now, we can't really necessarily trust each other, because we know that humans are flawed. And this is, once again, the humility and the gratitude question. We should be grateful for the good things that we have now. Don't put that at risk. And yes, we should pursue better things in the future, but we also need to think about really how to make these decisions together so that everyone has a voice in deciding what sort of future we are making. Um, because everyone has their own biases. A wealthy person is going to make choices that protect their wealth, and someone who's more on the edge of survival is going to make choices that protect their survival. And we really need to kind of come together and figure out, how do we make these choices together so that we are really benefiting the common good, and not just the common good of human beings, but the common good for everything alive on Earth, and ultimately, as our power extends out into space, thinking about the common good of what that means for the entire universe, or at least the part of it that we have power over.
Well, thank you. This is a great, uh, uh, would have been a great ending, but I do have one comment and one other thing. I still want to press you on the question about, okay, so if we find microbes on Mars that are of different nature, should we still go to Mars, or should we say no, their intrinsic value is high enough that we cannot interfere because that Mars is their planet?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think will become clearer as we have more conversation. Once again, hopefully there will be some way to set up these sorts of social conversations. Um, what I would say is that the distinction you made is, if Martian life is truly from a second genesis, as some people have described it. In other words, it's not related to Earth life at all. It has a completely different genetic code, or it has a completely different way of going between DNA and proteins, or things like that. That's really scientifically interesting. So we'd certainly want to study them without contaminating them at the same time. So they're certainly scientifically interesting. The next question is, are they kind of metaphysically or ethically so different from us that they gain kind of a different status than microbial life that we would find on Earth? Um, I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, honestly, I don't think anybody really knows the answer to that question. That's something that we have to come to decision, as a society, as we're going out there. Um, and yet at the same time, we know that, for example, Elon Musk wants, he's going to go to Mars, whether people want to or not. And then the question arises, well, are we going to stop him? Are we going to say you're not allowed to launch rockets, or something like, or we'll shoot down your rocket if you try to go there against the permission of Earth governments? um, you get into these really kind of very difficult situations. um, as to the kind of core question of, should we just leave them alone? um, I think the answer is yes, but a provisional yes. As best as we can answer it at this time, it's probably yes. We should be
Okay.
humble once again and recognize that we are flawed human beings who are likely to screw things up if we go there, guns blazing. We're going to do everything we want to. So, but at the same time, we should say this is a provisional yes. Let's see if things change in the future, because once you decide to do it, it's irreversible. So, and once again, there's a lot of risk involved in that. So let's not make the irreversible choice. Let's make the choice that can be reversed and say that provisionally we will not interfere with Mars's environment, until we decide, perhaps, I don't know, above a certain confidence threshold, that this would actually be a good course of action. And it's going to be a heck of a debate, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I always worry about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is my guide. So like, that we may think, hey, it's not a big deal, but what if there are other alien beings who think like, they are making a highway and Earth is just on the way. So
That's right.
so
A little
on that note,
humility to protect the local environment would be appreciated.
exactly,
Yes.
exactly. One last thing, any because I know that you like science fiction, and you have references in your book as well for these kind of space ethics questions. Any movies or TV shows that you might say, like, okay, for people who are listening to, like, they want to check it out, you say, like, this one actually really grapples with a question that you would really want to highlight.
Oh, there are so many choices. It's really really difficult to think about. Um, So I've been rewatching Babylon 5 recently, which was a popular science
Yeah.
fiction show back in the 1990s. I've been really appreciating it because I think it has a more comprehensive understanding of human nature than I would say Star Trek does. Star Trek is, of course, very optimistic, and it's great to have that optimistic perspective on human nature. I think that's really good, actually. We need those positive examples. Babylon 5 is a little bit grittier and recognizes, people are going to keep making mistakes all the way far into the future. Um, I would say also on kind of the more depressing side of science fiction, the Three Body Problem trilogy it's a first of all, it's great science fiction. It's really really fascinating, and it also has a very dark kind of perspective on human nature and also the nature of perhaps life in the universe. Um, and yet at the same time, it's worth reading. I think it's insightful, and it comes up with ideas that haven't been talked about before. Um, and of course, Asimov's work, the Foundation trilogy, is really good. There are just lots of different opportunities for things to read, and get our minds thinking about these things. And I guess the last thing I would say is that as much as technology is focused on imagination, you have to imagine the technology before you can create it. Ethics is very much built on imagination, also, which is that we have to envision this positive future that we can pursue. And if we cannot envision it, then we can't create it. We cannot take steps towards making that positive future happen. So I think that science fiction actually has a really important role there in training our minds to think about what good things are possible, what bad things are possible also that we should avoid, and then what steps we might take now in order to pursue that good future and avoid those bad futures.
That's a great point to stop. Professor Green, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you, and let's hope, like, I know Star Trek has a positive outlook, but I hope maybe we'll overcome our nature and we will be more positive than negative. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation.